Why is the dog barking at the mailbox again? Karen asked, staring at her phone as the sound of barking echoed through the window. It had been going on for days, ever since the old man's passing. But there was something different about this morning. The barking wasn't the usual, casual annoyance. It was frantic, almost desperate, as if the dog was trying to communicate something urgent. The canine's name was Duke, a well-trained German shepherd that had been the old man's companion for nearly a decade. Loyal, obedient, and known to be calm and collected, Duke had never shown a hint of erratic behavior. But now, every morning, he was at the mailbox, barking relentlessly, scratching at it with his paws, his eyes wide, fixated. Karen, who had lived next door for years, watched from her window in disbelief. What on earth is going on with that dog, she wondered. The family had been dealing with the loss of the old man, Mr. Hayward, who had passed away unexpectedly in his sleep. He had been in his late 80s, and though his health had been failing, no one had expected his death to come so suddenly. But this wasn't about Mr. Hayward's death. It was about what Duke seemed to know, something that no one else had figured out. For days, the family dismissed Duke's behavior as nothing more than mourning. After all, animals grieve, right? But Karen's gut told her something wasn't right. She'd seen enough strange things in her life to know when to trust her instincts. So she decided to find out what the dog was so adamant about. But she wasn't alone in her curiosity. Others in the neighborhood had begun to notice too. Something was off. And when curiosity starts to build, it doesn't take long for it to reach the surface. One evening, Karen's curiosity got the best of her. She walked over to Mr. Hayward's house, which had been vacant since the funeral. The front door was locked, but Duke was in the yard, still barking at the mailbox. His deep, guttural barks echoed off the walls. Karen approached cautiously, half expecting Duke to stop his barking at her presence. But instead, the dog's eyes locked with hers, and he kept barking, louder now, more insistent. "Hey, boy," she said softly, bending down to pet him. Duke stopped barking for a moment, but only to turn and look at the mailbox again. His gaze was focused, unblinking. There was something almost intentional about it. Karen hesitated. She wasn't about to break into Mr. Hayward's house, but she couldn't ignore what was happening. She stood up and stepped closer to the mailbox. That's when she noticed something strange. The lid was slightly ajar. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her pause. She had never seen that before. The mailbox had always been shut tight, just like everything else in Mr. Hayward's life. His world had been orderly, structured, nothing out of place. But this was different. She had to see what was inside. "Maybe just a quick look," she muttered to herself. She reached forward and slowly pried open the mailbox, expecting to find nothing more than old letters and bills. But as she pulled the door open, something caught her eye. A folded, yellowing piece of paper sat at the bottom, almost as if it had been waiting to be found. It wasn't a letter, not at all. It was something much more significant. Karen's heart raced. She felt a chill run down her spine as she carefully picked up the paper and unfolded it. What she saw made her freeze in place. It was a will, an official document, handwritten in the old man's unmistakable scrawl. At first glance, it seemed like just a regular will. But the more Karen read, the more the weight of what she was reading began to sink in. The document stated that the old man had left everything to Duke, the dog, all of his property, his savings, his estate, everything. The family was left with nothing. The dog was the heir. Her head spun. This was a mistake, wasn't it? There had to be a reason for this. But there was no denying it. The words were clear. The inheritance was Duke's. The dog was now the rightful owner of Mr. Hayward's entire estate. Karen looked down at the dog, who was still standing by her side, watching her. His steady, unblinking gaze seemed to say, "You found it." It wasn't just a coincidence that Duke had been barking at the mailbox. He had known something was hidden there, something important. The dog wasn't mourning the loss of its owner, it was guarding a secret. And now Karen was the one who had uncovered it. The implications of this discovery hit her like a ton of bricks. If Duke had inherited everything, what did that mean for the family? What did it mean for her? The truth was too big to grasp in one sitting, but one thing was certain: this was just the beginning of a much bigger mystery. Before we go any further into the shocking twists of this story, make sure you're subscribed to our channel Heroes for Animals for more unbelievable, heart-stopping tales like this one. What was the real story behind the old man's decision? Why would he leave everything to his dog? The questions were mounting, and Karen couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery was only the tip of the iceberg. Something darker was lurking beneath the surface, and it was going to take more than just a piece of paper to uncover it all. The dog's obsession with the mailbox? It was only the first clue. The days that followed were a blur of disbelief and confusion. Karen could hardly think straight after her discovery. She had to tell someone. But who? The family? They would never believe her without proof. But even with the will in hand, could she convince them of something so outrageous? How could she explain that the old man had left his entire estate to the dog? She kept replaying the words over and over in her head. "All of my possessions, my property, and wealth shall go to Duke." It was absurd, unbelievable, and yet here it was, written in black ink on a piece of paper. She paced around her living room, clutching the paper tightly in her hands. She was anxious, unsure of what to do next. As a neighbor, she'd always had a somewhat distant relationship with the Hayward family, but nothing that would make them think she had any reason to get involved. But this? This was different. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something huge, something that would change everything. Her mind raced with questions, each one more complex than the last. She had to do something. So she decided to take the will to the family, though she wasn't sure how they would react. Would they be angry at her for finding it? Or would they be relieved to have an answer? One thing was clear. Karen knew they would have to see this document sooner or later, and it would change everything. That afternoon, she drove over to the Hayward house, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she fought to keep calm. Duke was still there, as if waiting for her, standing guard by the mailbox as he had every day since Mr. Hayward's passing. When Karen got out of her car, the dog's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, it felt as though he understood everything. As Karen walked up the driveway, she saw the rest of the family gathered on the porch. They looked somber, their faces pale and weary from the past few days. She could see that they were still mourning, trying to come to terms with the loss of their father and grandfather, but she knew that what she had to say was about to change everything. "Karen, what brings you here?" asked Mary, the oldest daughter, as she stepped forward. She had always been polite but distant. She didn't know how to react to Karen's unexpected visit. "I found something," Karen said, her voice shaky. "Something I think you need to see." The family exchanged puzzled glances as Karen held up the will. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, as they all gathered around her. Karen unfolded the paper and began reading aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Hayward's last will and testament states that all of his property and wealth is to go to Duke," she said. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. There was a long silence, broken only by Duke's soft barking from the yard. The family stood frozen, stunned. No one spoke. The gravity of what Karen was saying was too much for them to process. "I don't understand," said James, the youngest son, shaking his head. "Dad wouldn't leave everything to a dog. He was more practical than that." Karen nodded. "I thought the same thing, but I found the will and it's clear. It's Duke's inheritance. The dog is the sole heir." For a moment, the family stood there processing the words. The youngest daughter, Julia, was the first to speak. "This has to be a mistake. Maybe it's an old draft. Maybe it's just a prank." She was grasping for any excuse to dismiss the truth. But Karen shook her head. "I don't think so. It's real. I've seen the way the dog has been acting. He's been guarding it. It's almost like he knew, and he hasn't stopped barking at that mailbox every day." Mary's eyes narrowed as she glanced over at the dog, still standing near the mailbox, his gaze fixed on them. "You really think this is true?" she asked. "I don't know what to think," Karen replied, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But I'm sure of one thing. There's something else going on here, and I don't think it's just about the money." The The family began to argue among themselves, the tension growing thicker with each passing second. Some were in disbelief, while others were angry. How could Mr. Hayward, a man they had loved and respected, have done something so bizarre? Why would he leave everything to a dog? What was the meaning behind it? Was it a sign of betrayal or something deeper? Meanwhile, Duke's barking continued in the background, as if urging them to listen. It was almost like the dog was trying to tell them something. But what? Karen excused herself and walked outside where Duke was waiting by the mailbox. She knelt down to his level and spoke softly. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered, more to herself than to the dog. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, Karen felt like there was something more to this. Duke wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a guardian. He had been holding on to something for a reason, and now it was clear that the family had to figure out why. As she stood up and turned to go back inside, something strange happened. The mailbox creaked open just slightly, as though it was inviting her to look inside again. She hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of her. She walked over to the box and gently opened it. Inside, she found a small key, wrapped in a piece of cloth. It was an old brass key, worn with age. Karen picked it up and held it in her hand, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this wasn't just some random object. The key meant something. But what? She looked back at the house, at the family arguing inside, and then down at Duke, who was still watching her closely. It was as if the dog knew exactly what was coming next. She walked back inside and showed the key to the family. Their reactions ranged from confused to suspicious, but no one had an answer. "Where do you think it leads?" James asked, his voice low. "I don't know," Karen said, "but I think this is only the beginning. There's more to this story than just a will. There's something hidden, something Mr. Hayward didn't want anyone to find. Until now." The family exchanged uneasy looks. It was clear now. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was about something much more personal, something tied to the old man's life. And the key was the first piece of the puzzle. "Let's find out what it opens," Mary said finally, her voice tinged with determination. With that, the search began. They had to follow the trail wherever it led. And as they soon discovered, the trail would take them down a path they never expected, a path that would unravel everything they thought they knew about Mr. Hayward, his family, and the mysterious dog that seemed to know all along. As Karen held the key in her hand, her mind raced with possibilities. What could it unlock? The idea of a hidden treasure or a secret the old man had left behind seemed almost too wild to believe. Yet deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the answer to something much bigger than just a bizarre will. The old man had been a creature of habit, a man who prided himself on control and predictability, yet here they were, unraveling secrets that had been buried for years. The family gathered in the living room, the air thick with tension. No one spoke for a moment. Duke, the canine, remained in the yard as if he knew they were about to dive into something life-altering. The key in Karen's hand seemed almost to pulse with significance, but she couldn't make sense of it. "We have to figure out what this opens," James said, his voice low but determined. "The will's already strange enough, but this feels like we're not even close to the whole story." Karen nodded in agreement, her eyes flicking to the dog again. There was something unsettling about Duke's calm demeanor, his watchful gaze, as though he was waiting for them to make the next move. His silence was more powerful than any words could have been. They all felt it, the pressure, the weight of what lay ahead. They were no longer dealing with a simple inheritance. Something much darker was at play. "Should we go through the house?" Mary asked, breaking the silence. "Look for a place where a key might fit?" Karen's instincts kicked in, and without thinking, she nodded. "Yes, let's start with the study. It's the only place in the house that hasn't been touched yet. Maybe there's a hidden drawer or something." The family members exchanged glances but said nothing. They had no other leads, no other ideas. They followed Karen as she made her way to the study, a room that had always been locked when Mr. Hayward was alive. It had been his private space, a sanctuary where he worked and stored his most important papers. No one had ever ventured inside, not even his children. As they stepped into the dimly lit room, the scent of old books and dust filled the air. The study had the feel of a place that hadn't been disturbed for decades, as if Mr. Hayward had designed it to be left alone. Shelves lined the walls, filled with volumes of everything from history to science to fiction. But Karen wasn't looking at the books. Her eyes were scanning the room for something more. James walked over to the desk, running his fingers along the top. "This is where he kept his most important papers," he muttered. "Maybe there's something here that'll make sense of all this." Karen nodded and approached the desk, carefully opening the drawers. She was immediately struck by how neat and orderly everything was, despite the passage of time. Mr. Hayward had been meticulous about every aspect of his life, and his study was no different. There were no stray papers or forgotten items. Everything had a place. But as Karen reached the bottom drawer, she hesitated. "This feels wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is too perfect, too controlled." Her heart pounded as she slid the drawer open. It was empty except for one thing, a small, leather-bound book. It wasn't something that would normally stand out, but it felt important. The book was old, the cover cracked and worn from years of handling. Karen picked it up carefully, her hands trembling. "What is it?" Mary asked, peering over Karen's shoulder. "Another secret?" "I think it's the missing piece," Karen replied. She opened the book slowly, revealing pages of handwritten notes. As she flipped through the pages, the text appeared to be a journal, but it was far from ordinary. The words were cryptic, written in a strange code that Karen couldn't decipher at first glance. The journal seemed to contain detailed accounts of Mr. Hayward's life, but they were laced with strange references and obscure phrases. "What the hell is this?" James muttered, leaning in to get a closer look. Karen skimmed the pages, her eyes darting across the writing. It was clear that the old man had been keeping secrets, secrets far deeper than any of them had imagined. As she flipped through the pages, one thing stood out. A list of names, some of which were crossed out, others underlined in red ink. There were addresses and dates, some recent, others stretching back decades. And then, at the very bottom of the final page, she found something chilling. "October 3rd, Karen read aloud. "The key is the final piece. It will open the door to the truth." The family gathered around her as the realization hit them like a ton of bricks. The key they had found wasn't just for some random locked drawer. It was the key to unlocking everything. The truth behind the inheritance, the strange behavior of the dog, and the mystery that had surrounded Mr. Hayward's life for years. But what door did the key unlock? And why had Mr. Hayward kept it all hidden? Karen looked down at the key again, the weight of the moment settling in. This wasn't just about money. It was about something far more dangerous. Something hidden beneath the surface, buried deep within the old man's past. And now, it was their responsibility to uncover it. "We need to find the door," Karen said, determination rising in her voice. "Whatever this is, it's not just about a dog inheriting a fortune. There's more to it. Something that could change everything." James stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "Where do we start? The key's got to open something. Let's figure out what that is and fast." The family exchanged looks, and for the first time since Karen had arrived with the will, they all seemed united in purpose. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about unraveling a mystery that had been hidden for far too long. "We start with the house," Mary said, her voice firm. "There's got to be something here that will lead us to the truth." And so, they began their search in earnest. The house, once familiar, now felt like a labyrinth of hidden passages and untold stories. Every corner held the promise of a new discovery, a clue that would bring them closer to the truth. And as they scoured each room, one by one, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Duke, still outside, continued to watch them, his eyes following their every move. The dog was no longer just a bystander in this story. He was a part of it, a key player in a game that none of them fully understood. But one thing was certain. Wherever the key led, it would change their lives forever. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the room as Karen and the family continued to search through the old house. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of a drawer seemed amplified, the silence broken only by the occasional bark from Duke, still outside by the mailbox. The dog, who had once been nothing more than a loyal companion to the family's father, was now at the center of their investigation, a key to a mystery that, until now, had been too large to comprehend. They had gone through every room, opened every drawer, and inspected every nook and cranny, but the key, this strange brass key, had yet to open anything. Karen's heart raced as she thought back to the journal they had found in the study. The key is the final piece. It will open the door to the truth, it had said. But what did that mean? What door was he talking about? James, Mary, and the rest of the family were growing frustrated. They were tired. The search had been exhaustive, and the pieces didn't seem to fit. But Karen wasn't ready to give up. She could feel it. This wasn't over yet. The key was important, and it had to unlock something. She knew it in her bones. It wasn't until they reached the basement that the next clue revealed itself. The basement door, which had always been kept locked, stood before them now. It wasn't much to look at, just a simple wooden door chipped with age. But Karen could feel her pulse quicken. This was different. Something about it felt significant. She glanced at the brass key in her hand once more and walked toward the door. "Are you sure about this?" Mary asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. "It's just a basement. What could possibly be down there?" Karen didn't answer right away. She simply inserted the key into the lock, her heart pounding. The moment the key turned, there was a soft click and the door creaked open. The family stood in stunned silence as they all peered into the dark, musty basement. "Well, I'll be damned," James whispered, his voice low. He really did keep something down there. Karen stepped forward, feeling a chill crawl up her spine. She switched on the basement light, and the overhead bulb flickered to life, casting a dim glow over the room. The basement wasn't what she had expected. It wasn't just a place to store old boxes or forgotten junk. It was organized, almost clinical. Rows of shelves lined the walls, each filled with old files, paperwork, and faded photographs. But it wasn't the clutter that caught Karen's attention. It was the large wooden cabinet in the corner. The cabinet was locked, and it looked out of place. It was newer than the rest of the furniture in the room, its wood polished and smooth. Karen's eyes narrowed. This was it. She could feel it in her gut. This was what they had been looking for. "I think this is it," Karen said quietly, turning to the family. "This is where it all ends. Let's open it." They all gathered around as Karen approached the cabinet. She knelt down and examined the lock. It was a simple mechanism, but it had clearly been designed to keep something secure. There was no key in sight, but Karen wasn't deterred. She had already been through so much, and the pieces were finally coming together. She pulled out the key once more, feeling the weight of it in her hand. It had led her here, and now it seemed to be the only thing that could unlock the truth. She inserted the key into the lock with a trembling hand, and as the metal turned, a sense of finality washed over her. The lock clicked open. With a deep breath, Karen pulled the cabinet door open, revealing what was inside. There, tucked away in the back of the cabinet, was a small, leather-bound box. It was intricately carved, its surface embossed with patterns Karen couldn't recognize. Her hands shook as she carefully lifted it from the cabinet. The box was surprisingly heavy, and she could feel the years of history wrapped up in it. The family watched, their breath held, as Karen placed the box on the table. "What is this?" James asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Karen replied, "but I think we're about to find out." She carefully opened the box, her fingers trembling as the lid came away. Inside, there were several neatly stacked envelopes. The envelopes were old, their edges yellowed with age. Each one was labeled with a different date, some of them decades old. There was no name on the outside of the envelopes, but it was clear that these weren't just any old letters. These were something more. Without a word, Karen picked up the top envelope and slid it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, carefully folded and written in Mr. Hayward's unmistakable handwriting. The words on the paper were simple, but they hit like a bombshell. To my family, this is the truth I could never tell you. You will never understand why I had to make this decision, but know that it was for your protection. You were always meant to inherit everything, but I had to make sure that you would not be swayed by greed. It was the only way to protect you from those who would do anything to take what we have. Duke was always more than just a dog to me. He was my shield, my protector, and the key to keeping this secret safe. I trust him with my legacy. He will make sure you understand when the time comes. The words were cryptic, full of mystery, and even more questions. What did it all mean? Why had Mr. Hayward left this secret hidden for so long? And why had he trusted Duke with his legacy? Karen was no closer to understanding the full truth, but one thing was clear. The dog was at the center of everything. As the family stood around her reading the letter, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The inheritance wasn't about money. It wasn't about property or possessions. It was about something much more important. Something Mr. Hayward had been trying to protect all along. The dog, Duke. Karen closed the box with a sigh, the weight of it all settling in. She looked around at the family, their faces a mix of confusion and realization. I don't have all the answers yet, Karen said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. But I think we've found the heart of it all. Now we need to figure out what comes next. Duke, still outside, let out another bark, almost as if he was calling them to action. The family had uncovered the first part of the truth, but the real challenge was still ahead. The mystery was far from over, and the key to unlocking the rest of the story was still in their hands. This was only the beginning. The truth was beginning to come into focus, but it felt like there was always another layer waiting to be uncovered. Karen sat down at the table, staring at the letter they had found in the box. Her fingers traced the faint lines of Mr. Hayward's handwriting, as if the answers were hidden in the strokes of the pen. But the more she read it, the more she realized that the letter, while important, only raised more questions. What had Mr. Hayward meant when he said, "Duke will make sure you understand when the time comes"? And why had he trusted the dog with such a huge secret? James, standing beside her, looked equally perplexed. This doesn't make any sense. He left us all of this. But with the dog, how does a dog protect a secret? I don't know, Karen replied, pushing the letter aside. But we've been looking at this all wrong. This isn't about the money or the property. It never was. It's about the protection, the legacy, and why Duke had to be the key. The family stood in silence, still absorbing the letter's implications. They had always thought of Mr. Hayward as a man of logic and reason, someone who would never make such a strange decision. Yet here they were, standing in the middle of a mystery that seemed far beyond anything they could have imagined. Duke was more than just a dog to him, Mary said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. He was something else. Karen nodded slowly. Yes. He wasn't just a pet. He was part of a plan, part of something bigger. But what? That's what we need to figure out. It was clear that the dog wasn't just some random animal. Duke had been handpicked for this. But why? And how had he become the protector of the family's legacy? The pieces of the puzzle were there, but they were scattered and fragmented. They needed to put them together. The family moved into the living room, the mood heavy with unspoken questions. The house felt different now, more like a crypt than a home. The walls, once familiar and comforting, now seemed like they were closing in. The weight of the mystery had shifted everything. Duke knows more than we do, James said, finally breaking the silence. We've been so focused on the letter, but we haven't paid attention to what's been right in front of us. The dog has been the constant. He's been here through all of this, watching us. Maybe we're supposed to follow him. Karen thought for a moment. She hadn't considered that before, but James was right. The dog had been there since the beginning, barking at the mailbox, guarding the house, and now keeping an eye on them. He had always been a part of the equation. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Duke wasn't just a passive observer. He was a guide. He had been placed in this position for a reason, and that reason was to lead them to the truth. Let's go outside, Karen said, her voice filled with determination. Let's see what he's trying to show us. The family stepped out into the yard, the air crisp and cold, the sky a pale blue as the sun began to dip below the horizon. Duke was standing by the old mailbox as usual. He didn't bark this time, but his stance was different. He stood still, alert, his eyes fixed on the mailbox, waiting for them to approach. Karen walked slowly toward the dog, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to expect, but something told her that this was the moment they had been waiting for. "Come on, Duke," she murmured, reaching out to him. "What are we missing?" The dog didn't move. Instead, he simply sat down, looking up at Karen as though urging her to look again. And that's when it hit her. The mailbox wasn't just a box. It was the key to everything. Karen bent down and carefully opened the mailbox. Inside, there was nothing at first glance. No hidden envelopes, no documents. But then she noticed something she had missed before, a faint engraving on the back wall of the mailbox. It was small, almost invisible, but there it was. A set of numbers, scratched into the wood. "Look at this," Karen said, pointing to the markings. "There's something here. It looks like a code." The rest of the family crowded around, their eyes scanning the numbers. They weren't like anything they had seen before. There was no clear pattern, no obvious meaning. But it was a clue. A clue that had been hidden right under their noses all along. "Do you think this is it?" Mary asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Karen replied, "but it has to be. Let's try it." Karen carefully took out her phone and began entering the numbers into a code-cracking app. As she hit enter, the app flashed for a second, and then a new window appeared with an address. It was an old address, one that didn't make any sense at first. "This is a place," Karen said, her voice steady with realization. "This is where we need to go." The address was for a location just outside of town, a property that had been abandoned for years. It wasn't on any official maps, and it was a place none of them recognized. But it didn't matter. This was the place Mr. Hayward had hidden something that would finally unlock the entire mystery. "We need to go there," James said, his eyes wide. "This is it. This is where it all ends." They all piled into the car and made their way toward the address. The tension in the car was palpable. No one spoke, each person lost in their own thoughts. They had no idea what to expect, but they were determined to see this through to the end. As they drove further out of town, the landscape began to change. The houses grew fewer, the roads narrower. Eventually, they reached a dirt road overgrown with weeds. The address led them to an old farmhouse, its windows boarded up and its doors locked. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. But there was something about it, something that made Karen's heart race. "We're here," she whispered. Duke, who had been silent during the drive, jumped out of the car and trotted toward the house, his tail wagging. He didn't hesitate. He knew where to go. As they followed him up the steps to the front door, Karen realized something. The mystery was about to be solved, and whatever was behind that door would change their lives forever. They pushed open the creaking door, stepping inside to face the truth. The door creaked open with an eerie groan, and Karen felt a shiver run down her spine. It was as if they were crossing some invisible threshold, entering a realm where the rules of logic and reason no longer applied. The air inside the house was thick with dust, the kind that only comes from years of neglect. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the faint sound of Duke's claws clicking against the wooden floor as he trotted confidently into the darkness of the house. Karen stepped in after him, her heart pounding with anticipation. This was it. After everything. After the dog's strange behavior, the mysterious key, the cryptic letters, this was where it all came to a head. But even as they moved deeper into the house, the tension in the air only grew. Every room they passed seemed to hold its breath, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. "Stay close," Karen whispered, glancing back at the family who had gathered in the doorway behind her. They nodded, stepping forward with an unease that matched her own. The house was cold, the temperature dropping the further they moved inside. It was clear that this place had been abandoned for a long time, but it also felt purposeful. Like someone or something had been here recently. Duke led them into what appeared to be the living room. The floor was covered with old, rotting furniture, some pieces of which had collapsed from years of disrepair. But amid the decay, there was a strange order, a meticulousness that seemed out of place for a house left to rot. Karen noticed that everything was arranged with a purpose, as though someone had been setting the scene for this very moment.
"Duke, what is this?"
Karen asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't expect an answer from the dog, but it felt right to say it out loud. Duke didn't respond, of course. He simply walked to the far corner of the room and sat down, his eyes locking onto a piece of the wall that seemed slightly out of place. Karen's breath caught in her throat. The wall was oddly pristine compared to the rest of the room. There was no dirt, no wear from time. It almost looked new, and just below the edge of the wall, she could make out a faint seam. It wasn't a crack. It was a hidden door. Her pulse quickened. This was it. This was what Mr. Hayward had hidden all these years. "We need to open it," Karen said, turning to the family. James stepped forward, his face etched with uncertainty. "Are you sure? What if this is it? What if this is where everything ends?" Karen took a deep breath.
"It has to be. We've come this far. We can't stop now."
James didn't hesitate. He walked over to the hidden door and ran his fingers along the seam, searching for a way to open it. After a moment, he found a small lever, barely noticeable, and pushed it. The wall groaned and slowly began to move, revealing a narrow passageway beyond. The air inside the passage was colder than the rest of the house, almost as if it had been sealed off from the world outside for decades. Duke, as if understanding the significance of the moment, stood up and walked forward, leading the way into the dark hallway. The family followed, their footsteps echoing in the silence. As they moved deeper into the passage, the walls became lined with shelves. On these shelves were boxes, folders, and old files. Karen felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. This wasn't just an abandoned house. It was a storage unit, a vault of secrets. And at the far end of the hall was a small, locked door. This time there was no key, no hidden code to crack. The door was old, made of rusted metal, and it looked like it hadn't been opened in years. But Duke was undeterred. He walked up to the door and sat down in front of it, looking up at Karen as if waiting for her to do something. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking back to the rest of the family. Everyone was tense, waiting for her to take the next step. "Let's do this," Karen said quietly. She reached forward and, with a deep breath, turned the rusted handle. The door creaked open, revealing a small room filled with more boxes and papers. But in the center of the room was something that stopped Karen in her tracks. It was a desk, old and weathered, but in pristine condition compared to everything else. And on that desk was a single large file. The file was marked in bold red letters, "The Final Plan." Karen felt her hands shake as she walked forward and carefully picked up the file. She opened it slowly, each page a revelation. The documents inside detailed a plan, one that Mr. Hayward had spent years crafting. The file contained information about a secret business venture he had started long before his death, a venture that had grown into something far more significant than anyone had realized. But the most startling part was the final page. It was a letter, written by Mr. Hayward himself. "To my family. If you are reading this, then you have found the truth. You have discovered the legacy I have kept hidden for so long. You have a choice to make. The plan I started was never meant to make you wealthy. It was meant to keep you safe. It was a way to protect you from those who would have used you for their own gain. Duke has always been your protector, your shield, and now he will lead you to the next step. You have earned the right to know the full extent of my actions. You will decide how to use the knowledge in this file, but remember, the choices you make from here on will shape your future. Do not take this lightly. With love, Dad." Karen's heart raced as she finished reading. It was all there. Everything Mr. Hayward had been working toward. The secret business, the hidden money, the safety net he had built for the family. All of it was part of a plan to protect them from powerful enemies they had no idea existed. But what did it all mean? Why had Mr. Hayward kept such a massive secret? And what was Duke's role in all of this? Do you understand now? Karen asked, turning to the family. James, his face pale, nodded slowly. I think so. This was never just about money. It was about power and keeping us safe. He knew something we didn't. Karen looked down at Duke, who was still sitting quietly, as if everything had already been decided. The dog had been the key all along, the one who had kept them safe, the one who had ensured the family would survive the storm.
This is bigger than us, Karen said softly. This is about something much more than inheritance. It's about the future of the family, and now we have a choice to make.
The family stood in silence, processing the weight of what they had uncovered. Duke, ever the silent protector, stood beside them, guarding their legacy. As they left the house, the mystery was far from over. But one thing was certain. Their lives had been changed forever. They would have to decide what to do with the knowledge they had gained, but for now, the weight of the past hung heavy on their shoulders. Thank you all for following this journey. It's been a wild ride, and we couldn't have reached the end without your support. But now we want to hear from you. What do you think Mr. Hayward's true legacy was? How would you have handled the choices the family faced? Let us know in the comments.